Okay, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai Ba'Shem Rakakwadash, and double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. And today we'll be going through or covering Daniel chapter 11, verse 20, right? But a quick recap on verses 18 and 19. Daniel chapter 11, verse 18. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles and shall take many. And this is speaking about Antiochus III. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Right? And verse 18 is covering how, Antiochus III, he goes up into Greece and that area over there. And then he basically ends up going to war with the Romans, and they defeat Antiochus. And upon his defeat, he was made to sign a treaty known as the Treaty of Apamea. And the agreements within that treaty play an integral part of what we're going to read later on. And then verse 19, then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Right? Because as we went into the history during the last video, he started an expedition eastward. Right? And he goes on to die. So that's pretty much what that's covering about. How he goes on to die. And before we start verse 20, in the book of Maccabees, we can read about where Judas Maccabeus, he hears the stories about how Rome went to war with Antiochus III. So first Maccabees chapter 8. First Maccabees 8 and 1. Now Judas had heard of the Romans, that they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all that joined themselves unto them, and make a league of amity with all that came unto them, and that they were men of great valor. It was told him also of their wars and noble acts which they had done among the Galatians, and how they had conquered them and brought them under tribute. Right, and at this time of Judas, this was after those events of Daniel 11 and 8. This is after Antiochus III the Great, in his war with Rome. But what we're reading about is how Judas, he basically heard about those events, as it's basically, he's given a recap of what happened. Verse 3. And what they had done in the country of Spain for the winning of the mines of the silver and gold which is there. And that by their policy and patience, dealing with talking about the Romans, they had conquered all the place, though it were very far from them, and the kings also that came against them from the uttermost part of the earth, till they had discomfited them and gave them a great overthrow, so that the rest did give them tribute every year. Beside this, how they had discomfited in battle Philip, right? And this Philip is speaking about Philip V of Macedon. And remember, Philip V of Macedon, he was the one that Antiochus III made a pact with to come against Egypt, which ultimately led Philip to go to war with Rome and dealing with that second Macedonian war between Macedon and the Romans. Besides this, how they had discomfited in battle Philip and Perseus, king of the Kittims, with others that lifted up themselves against them and had overcome them. How also Antiochus the Great, the king of Asia, which this is Antiochus III the Great, that came against them in battle, having 120 elephants with horsemen and chariots and a very great army, was discomfited by them. Right, because remember, Antiochus fought Rome, dealing with the battles of Thermopylae and Magnesia, in which Antiochus lost. That's why it says he was discomfited by them, and he was made sign a treaty by Rome. And how they took him alive and covenanted that he and such as reigned after him should pay a great tribute and give hostages and that which was agreed upon, right? And this covenant is going into that treaty Antiochus III had to sign, the Treaty of Apamea, in which these agreements and more were within that treaty. How it says should pay tribute and give hostages. Those were agreements within a treaty, but there were also more. and the country of India and Media and Lydia of the goodliest countries, which they took of him and gave to the king Eumenes, right? And we read about all of this going into the secular history, dealing with Daniel 11 verses 18 and 19 in the last video, and here it is. We see it here in the Bible. And we also read about it dealing with the secular history. So what does that show you? It just goes to prove the validity of these scriptures, right? And all we read was pretty much just a recap of what took place in verse 18. And then, as we read in verse 19, Antiochus goes on to die. So now in the verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And this is dealing with Seleucus the fourth Philopator, who reigned after the death of his father Antiochus III. It says shall stand up in his estate, in dealing with the estate of Antiochus III, which a raiser of taxes, which is Seleucus. So now let's read more into Seleucus IV. Seleucus IV Philopator. Seleucus IV Philopator, meaning Seleucus the father-loving, ruler of the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire, reigned from 187 BC to 175 BC over a realm consisting of Syria, now including Cilicia and Judea, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, and nearer Iran, Media, and Persia. He was the second son and successor of Antiochus III the Great and Laodice III. He was made heir to his father after the death of his elder brother Antiochus the young king in 193 BC. Seleucus IV wed his sister Laodice IV, by whom he had 3 children, 2 sons, Demetrius the first Soter, Antiochus, and a daughter, Laodice V. Seleucid conflict with Rome. During the prelude to the Roman-Seleucid War, Seleucus was put in charge of the re-established colony of Lysimachia by his father. Upon the outbreak of war, Seleucus commanded his own force, unsuccessfully besieging Pergamon and taking the city of Phocaea, before fighting in the Battle of Magnesia alongside his father. Right, so, during those battles when Antiochus III went against Rome, Seleucus, he took part in those battles. He was a general or commander of his own force. Before fighting in the Battle of Magnesia alongside his father, after their defeat at Magnesia, Seleucus was made co-regent in 189 BC. So he ruled alongside his father. And the Seleucids signed the Treaty of Apamea with Rome in 188 BC, right? And as part of the treaty, Seleucus oversaw the supply of grain and scouts to Roman and Pergamene forces during their campaign against the Galatians. And this here says scouts to Roman and Pergamene forces during their campaign against the Galatians. So the Romans, they had a campaign against the Galatians, which is what we just read here. Chapter 8, verse 1. Now Judas had heard of the Romans, that they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all that joined themselves unto them, and make a league of amity with all that came unto them, and that they were men of great valor. It was told him also of their wars and noble acts which they had done among the Galatians. So, but continuing, in 187 BC, Antiochus died. Right, so Seleucus' father, Antiochus III, is dead, right? His brother, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, is hostage. And why is that? Well, dealing with the agreements of the Treaty of Apamea, 20 hostages had to be given up, and one had to be a son of the king. And so Antiochus IV Epiphanes is hostage at Rome, and Seleucus is now reigning. In 187 BC, Antiochus died after looting the temple of Bel in Elamias, and Seleucus took over as Basilius, which Basilius means king. So, that's why it says here, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. So in Antiochus the third's estate, a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom shall stand up, which was Seleucus the fourth Philopator. He renewed an alliance with the Achaean League and almost joined in Pharnaces the first invasion of Galatia before reconsidering and turning back. He also substituted his son Demetrius instead of his brother Antiochus IV as a hostage in Rome. Right, because like we just said, the Treaty of Apamea had it where one of the 20 hostages had to be the king's son. And that hostage was Antiochus IV Epiphanes, son of Antiochus III, and brother of Seleucus IV. But since Seleucus is now the king, his son has now become the hostage, and Seleucus' brother no longer has to be the hostage. Because Antiochus IV was only the hostage because the king was Antiochus III. Antiochus III is dead now, so he's no longer the king, meaning Antiochus IV no longer has to be the hostage. On September 3rd, 175 BC, Seleucus was assassinated by Heliodorus, one of his leading bureaucrats. The ancient sources do not record a motive for this act. Possibly it was simple lust for power, or possibly the sources misattributed to death to the one who gained the most from it. Heliodorus took over as regent, ruling on behalf of Seleucus IV's young child Antiochus. Heliodorus' reign as regent was brief. However, months later, he was replaced by Antiochus IV with support from Pergamon. Right, so, now we're going to read about why here in verse 20, it says that Seleucus was a raiser of taxes. We're going to read about that. We're going to see how Seleucus affected us, and we're also going to see that, that story play out dealing with Heliodorus. Second Maccabees chapter 3. 2 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 1. Now when the holy city was inhabited with all peace, and the laws were kept very well, because of the godliness of Onias the high priest, and his hatred of wickedness, it came to pass that even the kings themselves did honor the place, and magnify the temple with their best gifts. And so much that Seleucus of Asia, which is Seleucus the fourth Philopator, who we just read about, of his own revenues, bear all the costs belonging to the service of the sacrifices. But one Simon of the tribe of Benjamin, who was made governor of the temple, fell out with the high priest about disorder in the city. And when he could not overcome Onias, he got him to Apollonius, the son of Thracias, who then was governor of Celesyria and Phenice, and told him that the treasury in Jerusalem was full of infinite sums of money, so that the multitude of their riches, which did not pertain to the account of the sacrifices, was innumerable, and that it was possible to bring all into the king's hand. So here it is, because Simon was bitter after his fallout with Onias, and he wasn't able to overcome the high priest Onias. He basically went and lied about the amount of money they had in the treasury, and you might be thinking like, okay, yeah, it was a lie, but why is that? What does that have to do with anything? Well, because in verse 3, here we read, and so much that Seleucus of Asia of his own revenues bear all the costs belonging to the service of the sacrifices. So, he was pretty much paying for it out of his own pockets. So here it is, you got Simon saying, oh yeah, we have this, an overabundance of money that's not being put to use, that could be given to the king. So if the king hears this, he sees he's paying, coming out of his own pockets, paying for this stuff, and he's like, well, they got all this money that's not being touched, and I'm over here paying all of this. Yeah, just go ahead and bring that to me. That's what the king gonna think. He's gonna want that money. But as we read on, we would see that there actually was a use for that money. It wasn't just sitting there to look pretty. Now when Apollonius came to the king and had shewed him of the money whereof he was told, the king chose out Heliodorus his treasurer, and sent him with a commandment to bring him the foresaid money. So forthwith Heliodorus took his journey under a color of visiting the cities of Seleucia and Phenice, but indeed to fulfill the king's purpose. Right, so it says he came under a color of visiting the cities of Seleucia and Phenice. So, he came acting, as if it was just your normal everyday visit, but really he was there on a mission. That the king sent him on. He was there to get the money. And when he was come to Jerusalem and had been courteously received of the high priest of the city, he told him what intelligence was given of the money, and declared wherefore he came, and asked if these things were so indeed. Then the high priest told him that there was such money laid up for the relief of widows and fatherless children. Right, because these widows and fatherless children, meaning there's no head of the household, there's no father, there's no man, no provider. So they're going to need that money, because how else are they going to eat if they have no one to provide for them? Among other things, and that the sum of it belonged to Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man of great dignity, and not as the wicked Simon had misinformed, the sum whereof in all was 400 talents of silver and 200 of gold, and that it was altogether impossible that such wrong should be done unto them that had committed it to the holiness of the place and to the majesty and inviolable sanctity of the temple, honored over all the world. But Heliodorus, because of the king's commandment given him, said that in any wise it must be brought into the king's treasury. Right, so the Heliodorus, he got his commandment from the king, so he wasn't trying to hear none of that. So at the day which he appointed, he entered in to order this matter, wherefore there was no small agony throughout the whole city. But the priests, prostrating themselves before the altar in their priest's vestments, called unto heaven upon him that made the law concerning things given to he kept, that they should safely be preserved for such as had committed them to be kept. Then whoso had looked the high priest in the face, it would have wounded his heart, for his countenance and the changing of his color declared the inward agony of his mind. Meaning that the high priest Onias, he was filled with so much agony or pain or anguish, that you could tell just by looking at him. And not only that, but he was filled with so much agony that whoever looked at him, if you were to look at him, you would have felt that pain as well, because you would have felt bad, because you could tell how much pain he was in just by looking at him. That would have made you feel bad. You would have looked at him and maybe you would have started crying. That's just how much hurt was filled in his heart. Then whoso had looked the high priest in the face, it would have wounded his heart, for his countenance and the changing of his color declared the inward agony of his mind. For the man was compassed with fear and horror of the body, that it was manifest to them that looked upon him what sorrow he had now in his heart. Others ran flocking out of their houses to the general supplication, because the place was like to come into content. And the women, girt with sackcloth under their breasts, abounded in the streets, and the virgins that were kept in ran, some to the gates and some to the walls, and others looked out of the windows. And all, holding their hands toward heaven, made supplication. Then it would have pitied a man to see the falling down of the multitude of all sorts, and the fear of the high priest being in such an agony. They then called upon the Almighty Lord, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, to keep the things committed of trust safe and sure for those that had committed them. Nevertheless, Heliodorus executed that which was decreed. Right, so he see all this happening. He's still trying to go through his plan. Now, as he was there present himself with his guard about the treasury, the Lord of spirits and the Prince of all power caused a great apparition, so that all that presumed to come in with him were astonished at the power of the Most High, and fainted, and were sore afraid. For there appeared unto them an horse with a terrible rider upon him, and adorned with a very fair covering, and he ran fiercely and smote at Heliodorus with his forefeet. And it seemed that he that sat upon the horse had complete harness of gold, right? And we know that this was what? This was an angel, but there were more that came, because it says, caused a great apparition. So there was more than just one of them. And this angel, he basically drop kicked Heliodorus with his horse. Moreover, 2 other young men appeared before him, notable in strength, excellent in beauty, and comely in apparel, who stood by him on either side and scourged him continually and gave him many sore stripes. Right, so it says they scourged him continually, meaning, they beat the hell out of him. They were just beating on Heliodorus. And Heliodorus fell suddenly unto the ground and was compassed with great darkness, but they that were with him took him up and put him into litter. Thus him that lately came with a great train and with all his guard into the said treasury, Heliodorus, they carried out, being unable to help himself with his weapons, and manifestly they acknowledged the power of the Most High. For he, by the hand of the Most High, was cast down and lay speechless without all hope of life. Right, so the angels, they had beat him to the verge of death. But they praised the Lord that had miraculously honored his own place. They dealing with the, Israel, that had miraculously honored his own place. For the temple, which a little afore was full of fear and trouble, when the Almighty Lord appeared, was filled with joy and gladness. Right? So they're joyous now. Then straightways certain of Heliodorus' friends prayed Onias that he would call upon the Most High to grant him his life, who lay ready to give up the spirit. So the high priest, suspecting lest the king should misconceive that some treachery had been done to Heliodorus by the Jews, offered a sacrifice for the health of the man. Right? So, basically in order to keep the king from thinking, that they had did this to Heliodorus, that this was an act of treason, they offered a sacrifice for the health of Heliodorus so that he'd be healed and that he wouldn't die. Because, you have to think where Onias is coming from. If Heliodorus went back to the king, dead or, dang near dead, more than likely the king wouldn't have believed, that, angels appeared out of thin air and just beat the life out of him. Nah, he would have thought it was them who did it, and probably came back, waging war or, things of that nature. The king would have saw them as committing treason, which is what Onias wanted to avoid. That's what's in Onias' head. Now, as the high priest was making an atonement, the same young men in the same clothing appeared and stood beside Heliodorus, saying, "Give Onias the high priest great thanks, and so much as for his sake the Lord hath granted thee life." Right, so they left and they came back pretty much telling Heliodorus, like, you better be thankful to him because of his prayer, you live. Or if not for this, you would have been coming back with us. He would have been in the spiritual realm because he would have died. And seeing that thou hast been scourged from heaven, declare unto all men the mighty power of the Most High. And when they had spoken these words, they appeared no more. So Heliodorus, after he had offered a sacrifice unto the Lord and made great vows unto him that had saved his life, and saluted Onias, returned with his host to the king. Then testified he to all the men the works of the great power, which he had seen with his eyes. He seen, experienced, all of the above. And when the king Heliodorus, right here it's supposed to say asked. And when the king asked Heliodorus who might be a fit man to be sent once again to Jerusalem, he said, so here it is, the king trying to send someone else. If thou hast any enemy or traitor, send him thither. So, and thou shalt receive him well scourged if he escape with his life. For in that place, no doubt, there is in the special power of the Most High. So, Heliodorus, the king asked Heliodorus, so who else should I send? And Heliodorus is basically like, oh, if you got some people you don't like, go ahead and send them, because they gonna get what I got. And they might come back beat up if they survive. That's what Heliodorus is telling him. For he that dwelleth in heaven hath his eye on that place, and defendeth it, and he beateth and destroyeth them that come to hurt it. And the things concerning Heliodorus and the keeping of the treasury fell out on this sort. So that's the story dealing with Seleucus IV and Heliodorus, and why here in Daniel 11 and 20, Seleucus is called the raiser of taxes. But also, as we read, dealing with this secular history, this same Heliodorus here, who just got his butt kicked by the angels, is the same one who went on to assassinate Seleucus. But yeah, that's pretty much it dealing with Daniel 11:20. So one more read. In Daniel chapter 11 verse 20, then shall stand up in his estate, in Antiochus III's estate, a raiser of taxes in the glory of kingdom, which was his son Seleucus IV Philopator. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Right, because going on to his death. All right, so once more, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakwadash, and Shalom.